In the forsaken town of Alderstone, there existed an old, crumbling manor perched on the edge of a cliff. The locals called it Hollow Crest House, though none dared venture near. For centuries, whispers floated through the misty air, whispers of souls that had once lived, but were now suspended between life and death. These were no ordinary spirits. They were asterisk survivors, asterisk ghosts clinging to existence by the thinnest thread, desperate, ravenous, and twisted by the passage of time. Hollow Crest House had been abandoned since the early 1800s when a mass disappearance wiped out an entire family. Generations of Alderstone residents spoke of eerie figures in the windows at dusk and strange lights flickering inside the manor at midnight. But the truth was far more sinister than anyone could imagine. In the deep heart of the house, there lay a sealed room. Behind its heavy iron door was a place the living should never see, a room where the very walls seemed to breathe, where shadows writhed in agony. This was where the ghosts of Hollow Crest gathered, feeding on the life essence of those foolish enough to trespass. These specters were not sustained by the typical lingering energy of the dead, but by something far more disturbing, the last breath of the living. Years passed, and the ghosts, having once been full of malevolent energy, grew weak. They could no longer drift freely across the manor, their forms sagged like damp cloth, barely clinging to their existence. They were fading, but they would not die. Instead, they lingered on their asterisk last legs, asterisk, driven by one final, insatiable need, to consume the living in a desperate attempt to stave off their inevitable end. The arrival of Claire, a researcher of the paranormal, sparked their hope. She had heard the stories of Hollow Crest and was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with old tomes and modern technology, Claire was confident in her knowledge of ghosts, how to trap them, how to banish them. What she didn't realize was that the spirits within Hollow Crest weren't just ordinary hauntings. They were asterisk hunters, asterisk waiting for the scent of life to drift into their decaying realm. Claire's exploration of the house began innocuously. The air was still, and the silence oppressive, as if the house itself had forgotten how to breathe. She moved cautiously from room to room, documenting strange phenomena, the occasional shiver of cold air, the soft moan of wind through broken windows. But as she ventured deeper, things began to change. She felt eyes upon her, though no one was there. A low whisper seemed to follow her every step, a voice speaking in a language she couldn't understand. By the time she found the iron door, it was already too late. The door creaked open as though it had been waiting for her. Inside, the room was impossibly dark, the air heavy with something rotten, but Claire wasn't prepared for what lay within. The shadows in the room twisted into grotesque shapes, faces half-formed, limbs stretched and naturally thin, mouths open in silent screams. They crawled along the walls, dragging themselves toward her, their forms flickering as if struggling to maintain their grip on existence. She backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. Trapped, the ghosts, barely more than tattered remnants of who they once were, began to whisper in unison. Their voices blended into a haunting melody of despair, a song of endless hunger. They told her of their curse, how they had fed on life for so long, yet now, they were withering, their power fading. They needed her breath, her life, to hold on for just a little longer. The air grew cold as Claire's breath became visible. One by one, the ghosts reached out with their skeletal hands, pulling the very air from her lungs, feeding on her last breath. Her vision blurred, her strength fading, but she fought to resist their pull. Suddenly, she felt something strange, a pulse, weak but steady, coming from the very floor beneath her. She collapsed onto her hands and knees, her fingers brushing against an ancient sigil etched into the stone. It pulsed with a faint glow, as though some ancient power had been locked away. Desperation fueled her, and she traced the sigil with her fingers, muttering the words she had learned from her research, trying to activate whatever ancient magic had been hidden there. The ghosts recoiled, their twisted forms shrinking away from the light. But it wasn't enough to banish them. They still lingered, desperate to reclaim the life they had lost. Claire felt her consciousness slipping, her vision growing dark. As her last breath was about to leave her, the room fell silent. The sigil flared brightly, casting the shadows into sharp relief. The door behind her creaked open, and a gust of fresh air rushed into the room. Claire collapsed, gasping for breath. The ghosts, they were gone, or so she thought. As she stumbled out of the house, weak but alive, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her. The whispering had stopped, but there was a heaviness in the air, a sense that the spirits were still watching, still waiting. They had not been destroyed, merely banished for a time. Hollowcrest House was far from cleansed, and the ghosts would return hungry, desperate, and angrier than ever. Claire escaped, but the manor remained, and deep within its walls, the shadows continued to stir, biding their time, clinging to the last shreds of their existence. They would survive. They always did. But for how long? And who would be their next victim? Claire barely made it out of Hollowcrest House alive, yet she couldn't leave it behind. Not really. The images of the grotesque, writhing shadows haunted her dreams, and the whispers, those wretched, hollow voices, still echoed in her mind, even far away from the manor. Weeks passed, but her nightmares only grew worse. She woke each night gasping for breath, feeling those skeletal hands reaching for her again, stealing the air from her lungs. Claire had become a shell of herself, eyes hollow, voice quiet, as if some part of her had stayed behind in that cursed house. She tried to forget, to bury herself in work, but no amount of research could quiet the gnawing dread inside her. The books she had once studied with such fervor now mocked her with their useless words. She had thought herself an expert on the paranormal, but Hollowcrest had shown her how little she really knew. One night, just as Claire was about to succumb to sleep, the whispers returned not in her dreams, but in the quiet stillness of her room. They were faint at first, as though carried on a distant wind, but slowly they grew louder. She bolted upright in her bed, heart pounding. The shadows in her room seemed to shift, as if something unseen was moving within them. She wasn't alone. Desperate, Claire lit a candle, its flickering light casting long, trembling shadows against the walls. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the whispers. That's when she saw it, a figure, barely discernible, standing in the far corner of her room, half obscured by darkness. Its form was gaunt, with hollow eyes that stared straight at her. It wasn't entirely there, as though it was only a fragment of something much worse. Her breath caught in her throat as the whispers intensified. They weren't just incoherent murmurs anymore. They were speaking to her, calling her back to the manor. "We're not finished. Come back. You belong to us now." Claire's body trembled. She had escaped Hollowcrest, but it was clear she had never truly left. Something had followed her, something desperate. The ghosts of Hollowcrest weren't bound to the manor anymore. They were asterisk following asterisk her, slipping into her world, growing stronger by the day. Frantically, Claire riffled through her old research notes, searching for anything that could explain this. How could they have crossed over? Wasn't the sigil supposed to keep them contained? Her hands shook as she pored over her writings until she found it a passage she had barely noticed before. When the soul lingers too long, it may cling not to a place, but to a person, entwining itself with the living. Only when the tether is severed can the soul find peace, or claim the one it follows. Claire's blood ran cold. They weren't haunting Hollowcrest anymore. They were haunting asterisk her asterisk. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The figure in the corner edged closer, though it never moved, just floated, inching toward her, its face twisted in hunger, in desperation. "Come back. We're waiting." She backed away, her mind racing. There was only one way to end this. She had to go back. Whatever connection the ghosts had made with her, it needed to be severed at the source. Hollowcrest held the answers and perhaps a way to free herself. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, Claire packed her things. There was no point in delaying. The longer she stayed away, the stronger the tether would grow, and she couldn't bear to think of what might happen if the ghosts fully crossed over. The next morning, Claire drove back to Alderstone, the looming silhouette of Hollowcrest House rising once again in the distance. The manor seemed more menacing than before, as if it had been waiting for her return, its dark windows like empty eyes watching her approach. As she stood before the manor's entrance, her breath hitched. The air was thick with the same heavy, oppressive feeling she had felt before, but now it seemed more aware. The house knew she was here. The ghosts were awake, waiting, whispering her name. Steeling herself, Claire pushed open the door. The house creaked in response, as if welcoming her back. Dust swirled in the stale air, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, growing darker and more solid with every step she took. The iron door to the cursed room was still there, closed tight as though it had never been touched. But Claire knew better. She could feel the pull, the connection between her and the spirits within. They were still there, weak but alive, clinging to her like leeches. She had to end this, once and for all. But as she placed her hand on the door, a chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong. The air felt different, heavier, darker. And then, she heard it, a slow, rhythmic thumping, coming from deep within the house. Her heart raced. She wasn't alone. But it wasn't just the ghosts. There was something else here. Something much worse. The whispers grew frantic now, overlapping and desperate. Don't go inside. It's not us. It's not us. Claire froze, her hand hovering above the door. Her mind reeled as the realization hit her. The ghosts weren't the only ones trapped here. Something else had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for her return. And it was hungry. Before she could react, the iron door creaked open on its own, revealing the darkness beyond. The shadows within writhed, but they were different now, thicker, more corporeal, like a living mass of nightmares. Something was moving within them, something far worse than any ghost. Claire took a step back, her mind racing. The ghosts had been feeding on her life, clinging to her as a last resort. But what if they had been protecting her from this asterisk? A low growl echoed from the darkness, followed by the sound of dragging footsteps. Whatever was inside that room had been waiting for her, too. And now it was free. The door slammed shut, sealing her fate. But Claire knew this was only the beginning. The shadows were no longer just whispers, they were becoming real. And something far darker was lurking behind them, waiting to claim the living. The ghosts may have been desperate, but this new entity was something else entirely. Something ancient, something evil. And Claire was trapped in its web. The house had never let anyone escape before. Would she be the first? Or just the next victim in a new nightmare? The whispers fell silent, but the terror had only just begun. Claire stood frozen before the iron door, her breath shallow, her heart hammering in her chest. The low growl from within the room reverberated through the manor's decaying walls, and the dragging footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Whatever had been locked away in that room, hidden beneath the ghost's desperate grasp, was now awake, and it was coming for her. The whispers returned, but this time they weren't pleading. They were terrified. It's too late. Too late. Run. But Claire couldn't move. The shadows, once thin and fragile, were now pulsating with life, stretching across the floor like black tendrils. The air grew thick, suffocating her, as the temperature plummeted. She took a trembling step back, but the iron door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. A deafening roar split the silence, and the creature emerged from the darkness. It was no ghost. It towered over Claire, a monstrous figure composed of writhing shadows and jagged limbs. Its face was an abomination, a void where eyes should have been, a mouth filled with jagged, twisted teeth that gnashed together in a grotesque grin. The thing's body shifted and flickered, as though it couldn't fully exist in this world. But it was real enough, and its hunger was palpable. Claire stumbled back, tripping over her own feet as the creature advanced, its heavy footsteps shaking the floor. The whispers of the ghosts grew frantic, rising into a fevered pitch as they pleaded with her to leave, to flee. But there was no escape. The thing had been waiting too long, feeding off the fear, the despair, the lingering energy at the dead end now. It wanted something far more substantial. It wanted her asterisk. The shadows lashed out, wrapping around her legs and yanking her toward the beast. Claire screamed, clawing at the floor, her fingers scraping against the rotting wood as she tried to resist. But the creature was too strong, and its pull was relentless. As it dragged her closer, its mouth opened wide, revealing a swirling black void where its throat should have been a pit of endless hunger. The ghosts shrieked in fear, but they didn't dare come close. They had been trapped with this monstrosity for centuries, surviving on the scraps of life that wandered too near. But now, Their fragile forms were mere spectators to Claire's doom. Desperate, Claire reached for the ancient sigil etched into the floor, the one that had saved her before. Her fingers traced the symbols, trying to summon the same power that had driven the spirits back. But this time, nothing happened. The light that had once pulsed from the sigil was gone, drained by the malevolent presence now towering over her. The creature loomed closer, its breath cold and rancid as it leaned down to whisper into her ear. "You came back, and now, you're mine asterisk." With a sickening lurch, the shadows constricted around Claire's throat, lifting her off the ground. Her vision blurred, her lungs screamed for air, but the thing showed no mercy. It reveled in her terror, feeding off the last vestiges of her strength. In her final moments, Claire's thoughts scattered. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She had fought so hard, come so close to uncovering the truth. But it was all for nothing. The house had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many before. The beast's jagged grin widened as it opened its maw. The shadows that held her twisted and tightened until her body went limp. Her last breath left her lungs in a soft, rattling gasp, vanishing into the darkness. And then, with one swift motion, the creature devoured her whole. The room fell deathly silent. For a long time, the only sound was the slow drip of water from the cracked ceiling and the creaking of the old house settling once more into its oppressive stillness. The thing in the shadows receded, retreating back into the darkness of its prison, satisfied for now. The iron door creaked shut behind it, as though it had never opened at all. But deep in the heart of Hollowcrest House, something had changed. The whispers that had once filled the air were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence. The ghosts had fled, their final tether severed with Claire's death. Yet the darkness remained, stronger than before, festering like a disease in the very bones of the manor. And somewhere, deep inside the house, a new whisper began to stir, soft at first, but growing louder. It wasn't the voice of the ghosts. It was something new a voice twisted by hunger, corrupted by the malevolent force that had devoured it. It was Claire, her spirit, trapped now within the same shadows that had claimed her, joined the chorus of endless whispers, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander into Hollowcrest House. The beast was patient. It could wait. Asterisk, and the shadows would never starve again. Asterisk.